Okay, so we got another video here, and this one is going to be a little more serious than some of the other ones. And there's a place for joy and bliss and love, but on a deep spiritual path, there's also a place for serious mindedness. And the topic of this video, I think, asks for a little bit of seriousness. Not anti-spiritual now. We're talking about God's power, and love and joy is part of that. But there's also just a dimension of God that is serious, and there's a dimension of spirituality that is serious and needs to be taken seriously. And this one, it takes a bit of a leap of faith. And so this video is about how to come to know that God can heal you. How to come to know that for a fact. And if you're coming from no spirituality, if you're just coming from no spiritual practices at all, then this is a pretty simple move forwards. What you would do is you would just begin to implement serious, regular, daily meditation and prayer in your life. And then also the beginnings of self-examination, a willingness to see one's disorder, to notice one's fears. We pretend we don't have fears. We pretend that, we just stuff them away and put on a brave face, but that's not the way of deep spirituality at all. So if you were going to find out if God can really heal you, then what you'd want to do is you'd want to begin to pray and meditate regularly. Give your will and your life over to God and say, "Here I am, God. Do whatever you want to do in me. You can have my mind, you can have my heart, you can have my body. Take it and do your will." And then an aspect of spirituality that is absolutely essential is just to begin to notice the disorder that exists within our souls and not try to stuff it away or justify it or minimize it, but just to really begin to notice what is there, not going digging for it, but when it arises, that we just give it some attention and pay attention to that. That would be the way in if somebody doesn't already have a spiritual practice and now wants to begin a spiritual practice. But what about somebody who is involved in spirituality? They're not yet involved in a serious meditation practice. They're not yet involved in a legitimate spiritual system that knows how to produce saints. But they've maybe pulled from many different traditions, various practices and ideas that they like, and that has created a sort of spiritual atmosphere in their life. And I want to say I think that's a good thing. I don't have anything against that. But if you want to come to know for sure that God can heal you, if you want to come to know that for sure, in your bones, to come to a place where you know all you need is God, that God can and will heal all of your disorder. If you want to come to know that for sure, in your bones, and have it not be something that is shaky, have it not be something that is, uncertain to you, if you want to come to a kind of faith that is rock solid, then you have to take a kind of experiment to heart. And lately I've been thinking of it as creating a vacuum in your life, a spiritual vacuum in your life. So if you wanted to know for sure that God could heal you, if you want to know that for sure, then you've got to have the courage to begin to dial back on the things that you do that are spiritual to make yourself feel better. And this is sometimes a cause of confusion for people on this path, because it looks like, well, why would I give up? I watch all these YouTube videos on spirituality and I read all these spiritual books and I go to all these different spiritual groups. And why would I want to ease up on that? Why would I want to roll back on that? And that's what I meant about this being kind of a more serious video, because for now, for the points of this discussion, let's just assume that all the things that are being participated in are good. Why would someone dial back on that? Why would someone ease up on that? And it comes down to coming to a place where you can discern God's presence in your life, and where you can discern the direct connection that you have with God in your life. And if you're in a spiritual community that is serious about that is taking that approach to God to heart in a deep way, then that would be a spiritual community you'd want to keep attending. But, these days, there are so many spiritual communities that are sort of like a playground of fun, new ideas all the time, new books all the time, new authors all the time, always something new. And it isn't much different than just surfing the net and clicking on this and then clicking on that and then clicking on that and just chasing, sort of. And so if we're going to go to God for real in a serious way, all of that must begin to calm down. All of the trying to figure it out must begin to calm down. Our best thoughts don't mean very much. Our very best thinking is not really that important on a deep spiritual path. What is needed is more silence. What is needed is more space, more openness, more emptiness, where we can begin to notice God's power and influence in us. And we need to know that it's God. If you say a quick prayer to God to help you, then you call this person for advice, and then you call that person for advice, and then you go to a spiritual group to feel better, watch a couple videos, maybe lay out a tarot card reading, see how that goes. If that's what you do when you hit crisis, you don't know what helped, what harmed. You don't really, you'll never know, is it really God that's done this? Or is it a combination of all of these things? And if God is going to be the way that you come to union with God, if you're going to go into a deep spiritual relationship with God, you have got to come to know that power as your absolute rock and foundation in your life. And you've got to come to know that it's there, and you've got to come to a place where you know for sure that it is all you need, that it can heal all of your disorder. You've got to come to know that. And that is a journey. If you're still in the other mindset, you probably think you could pull that off in the next couple of weeks, right? You probably think you could do that. But it isn't like that at all. This is a journey and an initiation that God will do in you. But we need to make space for that. And then, prayer. We need to begin to turn to God in prayer. And, I don't know what to tell people to say in prayer. I never know what to say. People say, what should I say? I never know what to tell people. I could tell you what the content of prayer should be. And the content of prayer should be along the lines of, I really want to know you, God. I want to know you. And I want to give you my life. And I want to give you my heart and my body and my mind. And I give you permission to do anything that you want to do in me. You can take anything you want to take. You can add anything you want to add. You can rearrange it in any way that you want to rearrange it. Please, just let me be what you would have me be. And I give you permission to use any means necessary to bring me to that place. And please do it softly. Please don't scare me away. You could say that too. And that is the content of prayer. And that's the beginning of a sincere relationship with God, where you can speak to God in this way and begin really meaning this when you say it. So you've calmed down on other spiritual practices, you've eased up on them, you've quieted all that down. It's sort of like a control, right? So let me let go of all these other influences, energetic influences in my life. Let me let them all go. Let me make a serious commitment to God and an invitation to God. And then let me see how that unfolds over time, so that I could come to know what God is in my life. And that's the experiment. And that's the initiation that people go through. And it can take a while to do. I mean, this could be a bit of a journey. There's always the temptation, just as soon as some disorder arises, just as soon as some doubt arises, there's always that temptation to seek out comfort somewhere other than God. And, no authentic spiritual path would ever say never do anything other than God. But this path requires that one come to know that God is enough. Then we have all these other things, but God is enough. And we must come to know that, or this path cannot unfold. So it's essential that we come to a place where we know it, that God is enough to bring us all the way into union. God is enough to heal all disorder. God is enough. And we have to come to know that deeply in our hearts. So let's say someone has gone that far. They have begun, they've calmed down on all their other spiritual practices, or if they didn't have any, they were already in that place. And now they've added regular prayer and meditation, and a genuine willingness to begin to see the disorder that exists within themselves. Let's say someone has begun that. So then it's about prayer. So your regular meditation time is happening. But then there's this time for prayer, to bring one's fears to God, right? Concerns. Now you're taking this experiment, and doubts arise. Thoughts arise. Maybe this will never work. Or maybe I won't like the way that it unfolds. And then there's these desires that begin to come up. It could be different for anybody. I don't want to make it too specific, but certainly there will be an egoic reaction to this attempt to give one's entire life to God and wait it out long enough to see what it does. And certainly the ego is, the false self that we've sort of created to get by in this world is not at all going to like this practice. It will begin to set up some, resistances to this. It will. And those resistances could come up in the form of doubt about whether it will work. Doubt about whether we'll like the way that it unfolds. We may want to manipulate it and change it. And you're going to notice that these things begin to arise. You have fears and concerns about what this journey you're on means. And you take those to God in prayer. I don't know how to exactly say this because it's very tricky. You're not necessarily looking for God to make any of those things go away just because you're taking it to God in prayer. You'll want to twist God's arm and manipulate it, and you'll want results when you want them. You want to feel better right now, and that may happen, but you can't really hope for that in any serious way, because you've got to let God do it the way God does it, and you've got to trust the way the process unfolds. Nonetheless, though, you take everything that arises on that level that is real for you into prayer with God, and you don't just say it flippantly. You get in a quiet room, especially if you're new at this. You get in a quiet room and you close the door. Maybe you close the blinds. and dim the lights and enter into a sacred space, and you go to God with sincerity and reverence and say, okay, here it is, God. I am worried that you are going to take away all of my fun if I give you my life. I am worried that if I give you my life, you will negatively affect this relationship I'm in. Or I'm worried that I am no good, that I'm damaged goods, and that you won't love me even though I know you might love someone else. Maybe you won't help me, but you would help someone else. Whatever these real concerns that arise as you begin to give your whole life to God, those are the concerns you now take in a reverent, sober-minded way to God and say, here they are, I give these to you. And that allows the part of you that is resisting God, pushing away from God, pulling at God, trying to control God, trying to force God, the part of you that is doing that, you've now taken directly to God's presence. You've said, here, this is going on, God. Here it is. The last thing you would want to do is hide any of that or pretend that it isn't there. And this is a mistake I think beginners make. Beginners, people that are new on the path, are especially prone to wanting to minimize these issues because they think they're not supposed to have them. They think a spiritual person wouldn't have these concerns or fears. And so they don't want to address them. They don't want to admit that they're there. And they don't want to bring them directly to God through prayer. But that is the process. And prayer is your best friend. If you take prayer seriously, God is present there with you. And so you take these things to God, and but remember again, you're not looking for a specific end. You're not really hoping when you come out of that prayer that fear is gone. It's okay to want it to be gone, but it's not okay to want that fear to be gone in that session as sort of a test of God. That isn't humble enough. It isn't surrendered enough. It's not soft enough. We've got to come to God. We're doing this experiment to see what God does, not what we can force God to do. Okay, if that makes sense. We want to see what God does in our life if we actually give God permission to really do it. We want to see, well, what would that be? What kind of changes would unfold if I really gave myself to God? If there is a God of love, right? If there's a God that cares, what would happen if I really said, here I am, I give you everything? This is the experiment. And addressing the fears that make us unable to say that sincerely is part of the journey. So prayer is your friend at this stage in the journey. You're now meditating every day. You've dialed way back on all these extra practices that influence your mind and consciousness. And when you're getting squirrely now, when you have relationship disorder that arises, or, various egoic disorders that arise, emotional pain that comes up, you're now beginning to take that to God in prayer in a very serious way. That's the way in. And and you'll have to just be very careful to notice when you really want to turn to something else to make you feel better. And that could be anything. For people that are very spiritually minded, it might, like I said, it might be getting out the tarot deck, or some, asking for a sign. And then every time the radio comes on, you're thinking, well, maybe this song is the sign, right? These lyrics, to give up on that and don't trust in that. One of the things about a deep spiritual path that we must come to understand, it's so important, is that God works deeper than the level of our consciousness. Anything that we must filter through our mind's understanding or our senses by feeling it, that is the shallow end of the pool. The way that God changes somebody is deeper than all of that. many Christian scholars have said that when you feel it, you didn't feel what God did. You felt the effect of what God did. What God did was something deeper than all of that, and you felt the effects of it out on the level of the senses. But what God did is deeper than that. It happened somewhere else. And this is essential to come to understand that God, these changes that God is going to do in you, they're just going to happen. It's not this kind of change. God says, now watch less YouTube. So then you do it. So then, I think God's telling me to go to nature more. Or I think God said this in prayer. I think I got this message. We're not at all concerned with that level of it. That is the shallow end of the pool. It happens, I'm not saying it's nothing. But that is not the sure way. That is not the sure path. The sure path is, over time, if you're patient, give it a few months, for it to start to begin to actually unfold in a way that you can see. When you invite God to do this in you, it begins immediately. But it takes time to manifest. So over a period of time, you begin to notice that these changes are apparent in your life, and you did not ask for them, or manipulate them, or create them. And this is part of how we begin to know that God is at work in this secret way, that we're not making it up. A lot of people think religion is really just people making things up, and then they believe God's there, so they go and do better things. But we're absolutely not playing that game here. What we're doing is we're really saying, here is my life, here is my mind, and here is my body. Do whatever you want. And then we're daily trying to walk in that intent. And then changes begin to happen that we simply do not create or understand beforehand. They just begin to happen. And I wanted to give you an example. So there's a woman that I work with, and this is me observing the changes in her. If she were telling this story, I would have to think that she would probably say, different changes than what I'm saying now. She might very well have more to say than I'm saying. 1 second. Okay. She might have a little bit of different things to say than I'm saying now. But so this woman, she told me that she does not feel naturally spiritual, but she came to wanting to meditate and have a spiritual community anyway. And so she doesn't consider herself to be mystical. She doesn't consider herself to be, overtly spiritually minded. She didn't feel like meditation came naturally to her at all. And in fact, when she began meditating, she told me that it was utterly miserable. That's what she said. Utterly miserable. And she said, I really hope it doesn't last like this forever. And I don't remember the change now, but I remember she said something that her life was changing and getting better, even though meditation was still utterly miserable. And she said it was very, very uncomfortable. And that eventually passed. But in the beginning it was like that, and yet she still saw changes in her life. The first change that I remember her telling me about is that she used to be afraid of the dark. And having to check all the windows and doors multiple times at night. She lived alone with her children, no husband, and she was afraid of the dark. And so always checking the windows, checking the closets, just making sure she was safe. She felt unsafe. And then I remember her calling me and saying that had gone away. And she didn't know how or why it had gone away, but after she had begun her meditation practice, that passed away. It ended. And that was the first change that she really noticed happening as a result of giving herself to God. But she didn't create this. She didn't think to herself, now I have God, I don't have to be afraid of the dark anymore. She didn't, take a placebo where someone says, here, take this pill, and if you take this pill, you won't be afraid of the dark anymore. And then, lo and behold, she's not afraid of the dark. That's not how it happened. What happened is she went in innocently, began her meditation practice, and this transformation unfolded for her. And she lost her fear of the dark. And that was that was like the first thing I remember her telling me, how her life had changed. Then the second thing that I remember her saying is that she was in conversation with a friend who had written a number of books, was, quite successful, and was involved, I can't remember in what, some kind of changing the world for the better, something actually really that is good. But she was with him in his living room, and she realized that as even though this was good and had value, that it seemed to her to be just a little bit shallow. And she started to think, without someone telling her to think this, without it being forced upon her, that spiritual transformation was more important than this sort of more flashy and fancy looking change that was being put into the world. And I remember thinking when she told me that this woman is now getting deeper. She is beginning to see the bright lights and flashy colors are not as important as they seem. And the deeper you go into meditation, the more that becomes apparent. We become less and less impressed by flashy change, because we see that there is a power inhabiting this world that would transform the world utterly and completely if we would allow it. And so sometimes things that we're doing, even when they look so neat to us, are another kind of distraction. And I may be putting words in her mouth a little, but that's basically the way I remember that conversation. And then the last change that I've noticed in this person is that she quite suddenly, and I think life events helped her come to this along with God's influence, she began to see that she had real disorder. She had real ego. She had real judgment of people. And she began to be just much more aware of how much disorder she had in her mind and in her psychology. And that she really wanted that to be different. And she began to really see it. Just begin to see her disorder. And I will say that hearing her say that, for me, was a sign, another one of those signs that God is at work in her life. Because it's one of the things that happens is that we become much more interested in seeing our disorder. We become much more aware of it. And so I give you those examples. And, I have a whole other section of this channel called Experiences, which I hope are going to be just about this. Here's the changes that happen in someone's life as they give themselves to God. And sometimes they happen in mystical experiences, but other times they just happen. And that's the level that we have to keep focused on a deep spiritual path. We don't want our changes to come because God said, now change this. And then we go about dutifully and make changes. That's a part of spiritual growth, but it's the shallow part. The part we're really interested in is that God makes these changes in us when we're not asking. I mean, we're asking for transformation, But we're not asking for that specific piece to happen. And so what we're trying to do is create a vacuum in our spiritual life where there's just an emptiness of influence. We're not trying to create a bunch of moods and psychological states and attitudes about life. We're not saying affirmations over and over, trying to generate some kind of spirituality. We're trying to say, I let all that go. I let everything go, and God, your will be done in my life. And I don't know what it is, so you show me. And then we wait. We wait patiently long enough for that to begin to actually happen to us. And our observation of God, our understanding of God, comes by watching the changes that God has actually done that we did not create for ourselves. That is the way of deep spirituality. And it's a huge leap from where most people are operating either in indifference to spirituality or without meaning to, just always chasing the apple of their eye, the spiritual object of their interest, the flashy light, right? The piece of tinfoil glittering in the light. I like this, I like that. We give that up. We put that away and we say, let me just be silent here, God. Let me be silent and empty and place your will in my soul. And that becomes, as far as I can tell, the entire way into union with God. I don't know of a stage advanced enough that goes away. I am not aware of a stage of spirituality so advanced that one now knows the way and they implement it. I'm unaware of that. I don't think that stage exists. I think that would be a distraction from authentic spirituality. This simple-mindedness, this poverty of spirit, right? This vacuum that we create, it remains with us all the way into union with God. All the way in. The best that we come to, what we're hoping to create with this vacuum, is that we begin to notice the changes God is doing and we begin to cooperate with them. So we notice that God is truly silencing our mind more. We are walking around and our mind is more silent than it used to be. That is just happening to us. We didn't create it. It's happening. And it's happening in such a way that it feels important to us. We can tell it's important. We can just sense that. So we don't then now make a bunch of noise by generating a ton of willpower and silencing the mind. But we do participate in the mind being silenced. I know this sounds a little funky. It's like, how do you say this? It's so delicate. And don't get the idea that it's so advanced you can't do it, but it is quite delicate. We want to not put more effort into it than God is. We want to match God. We want to come into what God is doing and be in what God is doing with God. That's the best I could say it. The mind is becoming quieter. Yes, the mind is becoming quieter, and I allow it to be quieter. I allow this to happen. I cooperate with this. I notice now, as I notice that the mind is becoming quieter, I notice now that parts of me might have been resisting that, and so I let go of that resistance. And then another part of me might be trying to get more quiet than where I really am, and so I give up that more. And I just get right where the Holy Spirit is doing it, and I do that with the Holy Spirit. This is the way. And it's that way for all of the changes that we begin to see. We don't want to be ahead or behind Christ at work in us. We don't want to be doing more than God is doing, and we don't want to be doing less than God is doing. We want to be right with what God is doing inside of us. And that takes a bit of time to even begin to notice. And for some people I know who I think are a bit advanced, for some people I know that are advanced, it's not so much that they feel God's power doing these things as they just observe, here is what is changing in me. This is what God is doing. It's that direct. It doesn't have to be filtered through the senses in any real way. It's direct in that way. So if you're going to come to know for sure that God heals, if you're going to come to know that God can bring you into union with itself, then you're going to have to take a leap of faith. And you're never going to know it was God who did it if you've got 15 other things going on that you're also doing. So you're going to have to quiet all that down and do the experiment. Here I am, God. If you're really there, here I am. And this experiment assumes regular meditation, and it assumes regular meditation of the variety we discuss on this channel. We don't mean any kind of meditation that tries to create certain feelings or leave one's body or have astral travel or, levitate or, become psychic. We're not looking at that kind of practice. We're talking about the kind of practice that is about consenting one's will to God's power and allowing that power to live inside of us. Okay, so this is a reminder for the people that come to the center and participate in the community. But it's also a message to people who maybe haven't done that yet. The only thing I would add to that is, my email is below in the video description. There's a Venmo, there's an email. It's linked to Venmo, but that is my actual email address. If you don't have a way of contacting me, if you don't know someone who said, hey, watch these videos, and they have my phone number, that email is a way to get a hold of me and be in contact with me. I just want to make sure everyone knows I'm available for that. And the reason I'm saying that is because this is a big leap. If you take this leap, you would actually be entering this path. You're not just observing it from a distance and gleaning some inspiration from it. This would be a real leap into entering this journey. And I think that if you take that step, you're going to want to have communication with a spiritual director who can help you discern the twists and turns that are unfolding in your meditation life, in your spiritual life, in your psychological self, and in your emotional being. You're really going to want to have someone to bounce off what is happening for clarity's sake. And so just know that email is there and that there is that possibility of having contact with me on that level. And again, I'm just saying that because this is a deeper step. Walking away from all the things we've used instead of God in order to find the way, that's a big step. It's a serious commitment, and it can create some uncertainty. We've leaned on a lot of things and used them in various ways. And when that is gone, there can be a lot of doubt and uncertainty that arises. And sometimes it is just absolutely essential to bounce what is happening off of somebody who has already taken that journey and can point out various things that you might not notice. They're happening, but you might not notice them. But nevertheless, if you're ready to take that step, take it either way. If you feel you're ready to take a step like this, then take it. And that would begin with 20 minutes twice a day of meditation without missing. And it's very important that we never miss our meditation, ever, every single day, every morning and every night, and make a real concerted effort. It's a gentle effort, but a real concerted effort to focus on that sacred word and to not allow our minds to become distracted by intuitions or thoughts or interests or anything like that. Just everything that comes, return to the sacred word. Everything that comes, return to the sacred word. If you're doing that practice daily, and the prayer that we talked about in this video is present in your life, you're offering your will and your mind and your heart and your body to God and saying, I just want to be what you want me to be. If you're doing that, then it will begin to happen. And you will begin to enter the stream. And it takes a bit of time. There's sometimes a strange period between where you were and where you're going, where it is very uncertain. And that is also true for anyone who's already on the path, but who goes to another level. There's often a really strange period of uncertainty from one stage to the next stage. You got used to living at this stage. You got used to how it felt to be with God at this stage. You got used to what it was like to be with God at this stage. And now you're moving to the next stage. And in between there's just, sometimes that's a very tumultuous time. So if you take a step like this, it may be really smooth and gentle, and it might be really slow, and so that there's just nothing really tumultuous that happens. But it's also possible that you could feel quite uncertain and out of balance and out of sorts. That has to be okay on a path like this. If we only want to walk sweet paths, we're not really suitable. We're not suited for the contemplative life. A deep spiritual life it requires walking, to get from one point to another, we have to cover some terrain. Sometimes that terrain is a bit rocky, tangled with brambles and bushes. And sometimes you can't see the path clearly, and you're just kind of hoping you're going to get in the right place, and it comes out, but you don't know in between. It's like that. So just know that there's help available if you decide to take this step. And I really, I don't know you, but sometimes I feel like I can feel people that are watching, and I just want to say, you are invited. You can have a much deeper connection with God than you have now, even though I'm sure you know God, but you can enter a deeper path. It's not who you think that does this. It's I guess if I was new and I didn't know anyone doing it, I would think of all these special, amazing people, and I would think to myself, I don't know. I mean, I'm not them, I'm not that neat. Maybe it's not for me. It's for anybody who wants it. Jesus said, if you come to him, he will not turn you away. Jesus doesn't turn people away. So if you decide to come to God for real, God will meet you. But God will come in the way that God comes. And not always in the way that we expect. Rarely in the way that we expect. But God will come and live inside of you and begin to transform your life. God is real, and the power is real. And the transformation is real. May the blessing of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit descend upon your dear, dear heart and mind. And may it remain forever.